You know,
They are.
January 2nd, 2013, Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody here. We'll start with a roll call. Let's start all the way to the right.
Ray Beal.
Diane Burton. I was gonna say.
Jared Westhoff. I'll give the invocation and then we'll have a pledge of allegiance by Diane Burton. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful to be able to have this planning commission meeting. We're thankful for this great country we live in, our nice little town that we have. We'd ask thy guidance and direction to be on us in this meeting as well as the leaders of our federal nation. We're thankful for our many blessings to be part of this country and this community. We say this in Jesus' name.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any declarations of abstentions or comments?
Do we have more volume on the back?
They're directional. If you have to talk straight.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Any declarations of abstentions or conflict?
Not here.
Not here.
And none here. Consent agenda for tonight is the approval of tonight's agenda as well as the minutes from November 7th and December 5th. We have those in the packets. Does anybody have any changes they would recommend or suggest for the minutes for either of those meetings for the tonight's agenda?
I didn't totally understand. I mean, when I got my email, did you put in the new part?
Oh, so the clean version,
Or is it, do I have the one version?
She has the clean version.
what you have here, she's printed it off. What you have here is what it would spell out as. You just have the one that was tracking the change.
Oh.
And so,
I didn't know what the difference was.
from what you're reading here, is this something you're,
No, I was just doing this.
oh, that's like, when you track changes, it shows you all the formatting changes and stuff.
Oh.
Okay, we entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I so move.
Any second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Announcements, I have one quick announcement, and I'll read it just so I say it correctly. To Mayor Roberts, City Council members, Commissioners, and staff, I am submitting my resignation as a member of the Planning Commission, effective as of 7 p.m. on the 6th day of February 2013, so as to not leave the commission without a chair until the next meeting. It has been an honor to serve with the other commissioners while aiding and assisting the town with planning and zoning issues. The service I have rendered is because of my desire that the rule of law be applied equally for all, regardless of people's station or conditions that cloud the issue. I will continue to advocate for principled approach to government with respect to the Constitution, the rule of law, and individuals' liberty. I am grateful to have the opportunity to serve and wish the current and future members of town staff, elected and appointed officials, the best.
Most of all, I wish the best for our town and all of its members. This is sincerely me. Are there any other announcements?
Well, that saddens me. I'll miss you.
Thank you.
I think you've done a great job.
Okay, we have no public hearings in this meeting, no action items. We have 3 discussion items under item number 9. Start with A, short-term rental options and regulations. This was discussed quite a bit during the summer. It was never a public hearing set. I guess in my mind, the question for me was, do we need to narrow it down to one of the options for the public hearing? Did the commission want to have a public hearing with both options as a alternative, and then decide after the public hearing? And I was curious, Mr. Nicholson, what your suggestion would be, whether we narrow that down or get input on both. Curious for your input there before we go to the commission on that.
Well, I think you can do it either way, and, you know, I guess it just really depends if the planning commission has a recommendation. You know, if the planning commission feels that one option is the preferred option, then you probably want to go forward. You know, if you're really mixed on the 2 options, and we can review those again, then you could certainly have a hearing on the 2 options that have been presented. Should we kind of review those?
Yeah, I think it's clear.
And this hasn't been on the agenda for a few months, so I'll probably forget what this whole issue is about, but it kind of goes back to the request that was brought forward by a property owner, can't remember if that was May or June, or last spring, and he hired an attorney, and you know, the attorney was pretty persuasive, saying that the Leeds ordinance wasn't clear. If the intent is to prevent it, then they felt, you know, that the ordinance didn't say that. And so I thought it was proper to make it clear, based on the council's action, which was to deny that, you know, that request. Property owner up in the Silver Reef area wanted to have a vacation rental, and the planning commission recommended denial, and so did the council denied it. But the ordinance isn't as clear as it should be, and so the effort was to, you know, make it clear. Obviously, if somebody's going to go to the effort of hiring an attorney and threaten lawsuit and all the rest, then there's probably some ambiguity. But so alternate A was more restrictive, and it basically, when we talk about short-term rentals, it's 29 days or less. Often thought it was overnight. You know, it's often overnight or weekly, and they're vacation rentals. And so Leeds has a provision for a bed and breakfast inn, and this doesn't change any of that. Bed and breakfast would continue to be allowed. The bed and breakfast is, you know, can be approved through a conditional use application, and as you probably recall, conditional uses are basically like permitted uses unless there are certain negative things that can't be mitigated. So conditional use, in a sense, is a permitted use of which you have an opportunity to put a few conditions on it to make sure it's compatible in the area. So Leeds allows for bed and breakfast, and so, you know, the only difference between a bed and breakfast and the short-term rentals is the bed and breakfast has to provide a breakfast of some sort, which is not defined. So, you know, the difference is the vacation rental, people go into a property manager, some a real estate company, and pick up the keys, and there's no owner-manager present, whereas a bed and breakfast, you have an owner on site that manages and makes sure it stays, you know, it doesn't get crazy. They don't have, it doesn't create a lot of noise and disturbance to the neighborhood. So alternate A basically prohibits short-term rental properties in residential zones unless it's A, a bed and breakfast, which we just talked about, or B, is within a mixed-use zone and part of resort development where short-term rental properties are designated as an allowed use on the plan and it has been approved by the town council. Again, if you go back to the mixed-use zone, a mixed-use zone is basically a very flexible zone where the applicant puts forward his proposed use. And then if it gets approved through the process, those become basically the zoning regulations, which is sort of distinct. So, alternate A is the most restrictive. Again, it limits it to a bed and breakfast inn, which is already allowed for, or if it's been approved in a mixed-use zone. Other than that, they wouldn't be allowed in a residential zone. You know, if you had a commercial zone, obviously you can have a hotel or, you know, bed and breakfast, but that would apply to residential. So alternate A, I thought, was kind of where the council was headed when they denied that conditional use for that other request for vacation rental. Option B, not quite as restrictive. Obviously, the same definition, short-term rentals, you know, anything that's used for 29 days or less. And under state law, you have to collect transient room tax, which motels, hotels, and bed and breakfast all have to collect under the state law. But in this case, in alternate B, it says, you know, the options would be a bed and breakfast inn, which has been approved through a conditional use process. Or B, again, the same thing, property is located within a mixed-use zone and it's been approved as part of a development plan by the Planning Commission City Council. Or C, this would be the only change. It says C, but for properties located in a residential zone, other than a mixed-use zone, the following provisions apply. One, the property is located within if the property is located within a recorded subdivision plat, then all of the owners have agreed in writing that short-term rentals is an allowed use within the plat, or the plat contains a note stating that short-term rentals are allowed within the subdivision. And then second, if the property is located outside of recorded subdivision plat, all of the property owners within 600 feet have agreed in writing that the subject property may operate a short-term rental, subject to approval of the town council and obtaining a business license. So, you know, in a sense, A and B is identical with the exception of B has the paragraph C, which then has this provision that if you can get everybody in your subdivision to approve it in writing, or short-term rentals are approved for a new subdivision as part of the platting process, then it would be allowed. Or if it's outside of subdivision, you get the approval of all the property owners within 600 feet. So that's, you know, that's the only difference between the option B and the option A. The one downside, let me just say, you know, it's when you have a provision that says if it's not in subdivision, you could do it if you get all the property owners within 600 feet. Well, sometimes that causes a little friction between neighbors. You go to your neighbor, you say, you know, I'd like to do this.
Well, if they say no, they say no.
Yeah, sometimes they say no, and sometimes they just do it out of a sense of obligation, you know, not to create a rift. But anyway, that would, option B is a little more flexible in allowing vacation rentals. So, you know, if the planning commission had a definite feeling of one route or the other, then you could make that recommendation and go forward. But if you don't, and you say, let's have a public hearing on both, that's fine too.
My personal opinion is I like option B better in that I think less people will feel inclined to apply for mixed use if they wanted to do some overnight rental if they were developing a piece of property. And where option A will push more people towards mixed use if they want that as part of their development.
Yeah.
And so, But I think both are well written with plenty of protection. I mean, 600 feet, getting everybody to agree on an existing plat. Brand new plats have to go through a master planning process and approval of the city council. But, I mean, I think both of these are good. From my perspective, the question is do you want it only in a mixed use area, or would that push somebody who's wanting that use to apply for mixed use when they otherwise might be happy with an R120?
Now, the other thing is, the planning commission, that is one other thing that has been acted on, that the planning commission had recommended that that the town establish a minimum acreage for mixed use zone. In fact, it was never, in the discussions, I think the planning commission back then, this is,
How long ago was it?
oh, it may be even before your time, but, it was about 9 months ago or a year ago, Ray, you may remember, but when we were talking about we made a few changes to the mixed-use zone, but one of the recommendations was to set a minimum acreage. And I think I had recommended around 100, and the planning commission said, well, let's do more like 200. Now, that's never come forward in the public hearing, and so the code's not been amended, but typically on a mixed-use zone, you'd have a minimum acreage attached to it that would be fairly, large. So that would be another. If, again, the other option is that if somebody wants to actually do a short-term rental, a bed and breakfast is one route that's open to them. But what that does is it forces them to be there to manage the property, on-site manager. It doesn't actually force the owner, but it forces the property owner to have an on-site manager, somebody. Whereas vacation rental, you say, you go pick up the keys at such and such an office and the house is yours for a week. And what they do during that week, it's kind of unmanaged, unsupervised.
Well, I don't know how you guys feel in the commission, but nothing wrong with holding a public hearing and getting them put on both options.
I don't have a problem with having them both out there to talk about. I may look more to option B also. Well, I think that we're gonna have them both out there and talk about it.
Do you have a comment on that?
Well, like, if someone wanted to rent their place out for 29 days, do you think it's 29 or less?
Yeah.
Could we put a provision in there that somebody has to come and check on them at least once a week or something like that, just to,
Pretty hard to enforce. How would you really know if somebody came in once a week?
we hire a policeman to.
More taxpayer money, huh?
No. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of hard to say 29 days and then just leave it, up to the neighbors to try to decide whether they're staying.
We stayed in a vacation by owner, our vacation over Thanksgiving, and they had the deposit so high, we were running around following the kids going, don't do that, don't do that.
Oh, yeah, like a evening deposit or a day deposit.
Yeah, I mean, these are people's private homes, and generally they do a pretty darn good job of leasing it themselves, but,
Yeah,
uh,
and that's true. If you have a huge deposit to begin with, people would be more responsible about it. Well, Plan B sounds good to me. Or either one. Like to have a public hearing about it.
so, how much
We have a
more?
public hearing either way, can we?
Yeah. We can narrow it to one to have a public hearing on, or have a public hearing on both. But either way, I think we need to make the recommendation to council on one or the other after the public hearing.
Okay,
So, I move that we set a public hearing for alternate A and B, the next plan commission meeting. sign ordinance, summary of proposed changes, and set public hearing date.
Okay, this is, another thing we've debated and kicked around quite a bit. Let me summarize. I think in your packet, you kind of have a summary, and I didn't print, or, I have a couple of copies here of the actual entire ordinance, but let's see. The Leeds, the sign code as it exists is 29 pages. I'm sure there's a couple of tables, so it's fairly lengthy, and it's pretty comprehensive like most sign codes are. That's kind of the nature of sign ordinances, it seems like a review. We looked at a lot of them over the years, as the St. Louis City has amended its sign ordinance numerous times. It seems like I've been involved in most of those, unfortunately. So I've seen a lot of sign ordinances, and this is pretty comprehensive and generally pretty well written. And so we've only really tweaked a few items, a few sections. But we'll just kind of go over them, and some of the changes were really pretty small. But there's a section that says signs that don't require don't have to get a town permit to build it. But there are some standards, and one of them is a construction sign, like you'd say, coming soon, new subdivision or something like that. Right now, the code is 8 square feet, which is pretty small for a construction sign. And we would suggest 32 square feet, which is a sheet of plywood size, 4 by 8. The civic sign, like the Leeds entrance sign, is, I think somebody said it was about 72 square feet. Right now, the code says 24 square feet, which is, again, quite small, so that'll go from 24 to 72 square feet, in line with basically what exists out there today. The real estate for sale sign, suggested go from 4 square feet to 8. Campaign signs, in the present code, there are some limitations on a 30-day time limitation on the posting of campaign signs. We suggest either eliminate any reference to time limits or make it 90 days, because 30-day, as you know, 30-day time limit on campaign signs is not practical. And in fact, the courts have thrown out those kind of limitations. Those kind of political campaign signs have a special exception. Then they're under the section, signs that require town approval and a permit.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Seems like we've been going over this for months.
Yeah.
When do we make a decision?
Well, you have to have a public
Find it.
hearing, and then you make a recommendation to the council.
Okay.
On that note, I think we're comfortable with all the changes. The last changes we were talking about was the wayfinding sign.
Okay.
So I think we could jump right to that
All right.
and then set a public hearing if we're comfortable with how the wayfinding signs, language has turned out.
At the last time we discussed this, and I guess it's been 2 or 3 months ago, I can't remember, but I indicated I would contact UDOT, which I did, and actually we traded some phone messages, but
Did we decide to leave wayfinding out for them? I remember we were going over it.
let me just do this one. I think we were leaving it out.
Because of your conversation with
Yeah, UDOT has, as you come off on Main Street, there is that brown sign that says Silver Reef Museum and Silver Reef straight ahead. Now, it needs some updating. It's pretty faded. And when I mentioned to Scott Snow at UDOT, he said, well, that's not his department, but they're responsible for the maintenance and taking care of it. And, to follow up with the person who's in charge of that. But I think UDOT will
be willing to upgrade the signs that direct people up to Silver Reef and the museum and elsewhere. So,
And maybe we can request they add a CCC and Red Cliffs and
Yes.
Quail Creek to that sign.
we could, absolutely could.
And because of that, we felt like we didn't need to deal with the wayfinding.
So I think,
So, as a commission, are we comfortable with that, or do we want to deal with wayfinding?
I'm comfortable.
since Main Street is a state road, UDOT takes responsibility for signage, and usually they try to be responsive. So if the town council were to make that request, please add, you did the CCC camp or some other thing, that I think they'd be responsive.
Any comments?
I'm okay with that.
Well, do we want to entertain a motion to set the public hearing for our February 6th meeting?
Second,
I'm done.
did you say yes?
Yes, I second it.
Who motioned it?
Right.
Hey, you want to make that motion official?
I'd like to make the motion that we have our signing.
Public hearing.
What's it called?
Sign ordinance.
Sign ordinance. Set up a plan commission hearing on our next meeting, first Wednesday in February.
Any second?
I second.
All in favor?
I.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, road master plan discussion. We had a very productive meeting last time. Thought it was excellent. We had a lot of participation from the public. It was a great follow-up to the meeting before. If you remember the meeting before, we had Sunrise Engineering scope of work, and it was a very detailed scope of work, quite involved and quite costly. And we went through that scope of work and said, well, why don't we break this down and get a lot of input in from the public and help us narrow down what Sunrise would do so it wouldn't cost so much. And our last meeting was basically a workshop for property owners where we learned about where property owners would prefer roads, topography constraints, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I thought it was a very productive meeting where everybody drew on the maps and had a very good discussion about better choices and what people prefer. Sunrise has those changes, and they're looking to update a map with those changes on it. The next, and what we want to talk about is the next steps, so we get to where we can continually revise this to the point of a public hearing. So generally, after you have the road locations there, the next layer would probably be to look at topography, or not topography, but land use. On a road master plan, a lot of times people will just assign, I believe that the old road master plan, or the master plan we're looking at revising, just kind of assign 2 units per acre all through town to decide what the size of the roads would be, whether it be an arterial or a major collector or a minor collector. Since that has happened, Form Tomorrow came in and updated our general plan. So we're asking Sunrise to give us a map with these new suggested locations with that general plan underneath it, so that then we can size roads appropriately. And that's kind of what I see as the next step. This is on the agenda, so us as a commission could talk about and agree on what the next step would be towards finishing up this road master plan. So, Bob, would you suggest, is that?
Yeah, that is the next step, and, I haven't met with Sunrise, and I was gone for a week around Christmas, and I haven't got with Sunrise, and I'm not sure what they've done, but that is, we take the land use plan that was approved, and then that would create some trip generation rates. If, you know, if there's certain areas that are designed for commercial or a little higher density, then, you know, that transfers into, you know, the need for greater road capacity. So I think that is clearly the first step, is to overlay the land use. And then you get the trip generation rates out of that. And I think with that, based on the public comments, I think there was some good public comments about roads in the wrong location, and people recognize that some of the roads on this current plan go up steep hillsides that probably don't make a lot of sense. And so take the public comments and kind of meld those two things together. And I think, you know, we can have a basis for kind of a draft.
Okay. So I think Sunrise is waiting for that direction of what piece we want done next, and I think it would make sense to direct them. They were given the direction to take the comments that we had from our last work meeting and put it on a map. But to go forward from that, they need direction of if we want them to underlay or overlay the general plan map on it. And I think that's what they're waiting for.
Yeah, and I was going to help with that, and like I said, we just put it, I haven't got together with them on that.
But I know they're waiting for our direction too, so.
Yeah.
Were they gonna just do like a draft, or,
Well,
I mean, the
they
way
bring-
he talked, it was real expensive to make up a new.
Well, his original proposal was almost as if you took a road plan from scratch, starting over, and go through the various steps.
Oh,
And in this case, where the plan that was put together in 2007 is, I think what we're trying to do is just fine tune it, and
right.
make some corrections rather than really go back to the ground
Already.
zero. An engineering company, as like Rick said, they worry about their professional reputation that's associated. And when it goes to a public hearing, they want to have all the facts and the groundwork and the basis for it. You know, they want to say, well, we've evaluated this sector and it likely generate X number of trips in the next, 20 or 30 years. So there is some analysis that would go into it, so they feel that, that it has a lot of professional review behind it and substance. And that's what we're trying to kind of balance it too, is without going back to ground zero, is kind of tweak it, fine tune it with enough information that, it's very defensible and they feel that they're willing to put their name behind it as, Sunrise Engineering.
So once we give, it wouldn't be ready by February, I guess.
No, but I think, we could have some more information, we could have the land use and incorporate some of those comments that came from the public and say, okay, here's kind of
There's an updated
here's
draft.
an updated draft, right?
Yeah. So what we're kind of doing is, instead of saying Sunrise, go do the plan, we're saying Sunrise, just do some drafting for us. And between the commission and the property owners, we'll create the road master plan at this point. And,
That would be cheaper.
quite a bit. So we'll be paying for them doing drafting, and we'll have more of a general road master plan than a nailed down, engineered, very specific. So, we're good with that direction then?
What do you think the timeframe is for that?
For the next draft. If we can get form tomorrow and send over the CAD file, they should be ready for the February meeting. And then we
I
just.
think everybody's just kind of anxious about it.
Sure.
So,
You can finish it up.
get it as soon as we can, great.
I felt like the way it was led on that night, it was pretty good back to ground zero.
I was really impressed with,
I was impressed.
Everybody's
Saying it was
input.
Back to ground zero, so I wasn't aware.
well, I think there were some things that were okay. Wasn't there?
I thought it was much
worse than we had with what we did. My opinion on it was kind of a start over situation on most of the proposed roads.
Well, between Google Earth and people who actually own the property giving input on where it should go, I thought it was a very well refined plan. In fact, I thought it was more refined than what an engineer would do, because people who walk the land. I thought it was good that there was an acknowledgement that there is a need for two ingress egress by our ordinance, and that we had to deal with that, whether it's, no matter where it is in town. I think it's great that the town's already taken care of the Silver Reef area with Rick Sant requiring the development agreement and connection, and at some point between there and Gordon Casey, so that both Angel Springs area and Silver Reef will eventually have two ingress egress. I think there's still some of that to be worked out, figured out. I think it's going in a good direction. The road location wise, I come out of that last meeting feeling like it was much upgraded and made a lot more sense, most of the comments on the map. And that from there, we could then just underlay the master plan, the general plan map, and assign a unit count, and basically say, on this unit count, if it's 9 trips per day, peak hour, we need an arterial road here, or we need a connector. And I think that's the step we're on.
And some important things that happened since the road plan was adopted in 2007. Now you have the tortoise preserve down there, that, you know, this horizontal road or east to west probably is not feasible, it's not gonna happen because it cuts right through the center of that preserve. And so things like that need to be taken into account. So I think, Sunrise has, and maybe this will be up to the mayor and town council to give the Sunrise some budget authorization to proceed on, a certain number of hours or whatever, then I'd be glad to meet with them and we'll try and get the land use plan. Whether we can get it from Form Tomorrow Group, or whether we just have to take it and, copy it and
Regenerate.
yeah, transfer it.
Okay. Well, I think we can do that in direction of the mayor. So, any staff reports? We'll go ahead and number 10. Well, I should ask, commissioners, have anything left on the road master plan discussion?
I don't,
I like the way it's going forward,
Okay.
like getting done.
Number 10, staff reports. Bob and Bob. You guys have anything? Okay, entertain a motion for adjournment.
I shall move.
Thank you, everyone.
Probably going to exercise that.